This is the time when the gods descended from heaven and co-inhabited the earth with man.
Mel Gibson has reportedly uncovered something he believes could completely reshape how people view Jesus Christ. Not a rumor, not another internet conspiracy, but an ancient manuscript hidden for centuries inside a remote Ethiopian monastery, a place so isolated that reaching it once required climbing by rope along sheer cliffs. According to Gibson, the text presents a version of Jesus unlike the one most of the world grew up hearing about. A portrayal so different, he claims, that powerful religious institutions spent centuries keeping it out of mainstream Christianity. And now, Gibson is allegedly turning that discovery into a massive $100 million project. But the real shock isn't just the manuscript itself. It's the fact that the Ethiopian Bible survived while countless other ancient texts disappeared from history. Hidden away for generations, untouched by the institutions that shaped Western Christianity, it remained waiting in silence. And what these writings supposedly reveal about Jesus challenges nearly everything many people assume they already know. This isn't just a story about religion. It's a story about lost history, forbidden texts, and the possibility that an entirely different narrative survived far from the reach of Europe and Rome. If hidden mysteries, ancient secrets, and controversial discoveries fascinate you, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications, because what you're about to hear could completely change the way you look at the story of Jesus Christ forever. In 2004, Mel Gibson released The Passion of the Christ, a brutal, uncompromising film shot entirely in Aramaic, Latin, and Hebrew. No Hollywood polish, no softened version for mainstream audiences. It focused on the final hours of Jesus' life, with such intensity that audiences left theaters stunned. The whipping, the crown of thorns, the agonizing walk to Calvary. Some critics called it too graphic. Others called it the most realistic depiction of Christ's suffering ever put on screen. Made on a relatively modest budget, the film earned over $600 million worldwide and remained the highest-grossing R-rated film in U.S. history for nearly 20 years. But according to Gibson, that movie was only the beginning. For over 2 decades, he's been quietly developing a sequel, a project he has repeatedly described as deeply personal and impossible to abandon, even while much of Hollywood distanced itself from him. The film is now officially titled The Resurrection of the Christ, and this is where things start getting strange. The project is reportedly split into 2 parts, backed by Lionsgate with a budget near $100 million. Production is taking place at Rome's famous Cinecittà Studios. Part 1 is expected on Good Friday 2027, while Part 2 is planned for release 40 days later on Ascension Day. But Gibson has hinted that this won't be a normal biblical film. In interviews, he explained that the story wouldn't unfold in a simple chronological way. Instead, it would move across multiple realms and timelines, blending the resurrection with visions of heaven, hell, fallen angels, and cosmic events beyond Earth itself. In a 2022 interview, Gibson said the story had to begin with the fall of the angels, adding that, to tell it properly, you have to go somewhere else entirely. Then, during an appearance on the Joe Rogan Experience, he pushed even further. He revealed he was working from 2 scripts, one traditional and another he described as an acid trip. His words, "You're going into other realms. You're in hell. You're watching the angels fall." And here's the unsettling part. That exact kind of journey, Christ descending through heavenly realms, confronting fallen beings, moving through the underworld, appears in ancient writings that existed long before modern Christianity ever took shape. Texts preserved for centuries inside isolated Ethiopian monasteries, texts most people were never meant to read. At the center of those writings is the mysterious Book of Enoch. Written centuries before the birth of Jesus, the text describes a supernatural figure known as the Son of Man, a being surrounded by fire, clothed in overwhelming light, seated in judgment over humanity itself, and the descriptions are disturbingly familiar. A head white like wool, eyes burning like fire, a voice like rushing waters, a radiant face impossible to look upon. Now compare that to the Book of Revelation. The similarities are almost impossible to ignore. In fact, scholars who studied both texts side by side concluded that Revelation may have borrowed heavily from imagery already present in Enoch centuries earlier. Even stranger, the New Testament book of Jude directly quotes Enoch almost word for word. Early Christian writers treated it as sacred scripture. And then, it vanished from most Bibles. Church councils later rejected the text. Copies disappeared across much of the world. It was labeled dangerous, controversial, unsuitable for ordinary believers. But not every copy was destroyed. Because while empires rose and collapsed, Ethiopian monks hidden in remote cliffside monasteries kept preserving the manuscripts by hand, generation after generation. And according to many researchers, those forgotten writings may contain ideas about Christ, angels, and the unseen world that modern Christianity was never supposed to keep. In the first heaven, angels watched over the earth below. In the second, darker beings moved in rebellion, trapped between judgment and chaos. By the third heaven, Isaiah witnessed realms of unimaginable light, where the righteous existed in forms beyond human understanding. Each level became more overwhelming, more impossible to describe with ordinary language. And at the center of it all was Christ, not just as a teacher from Nazareth, but as a cosmic being moving between dimensions, descending through creation itself before entering the physical world. According to these ancient Ethiopian texts, Christ passed through each heaven in secret, disguising his true glory, so the powers ruling those realms wouldn't recognize him until it was too late. That detail matters, because Gibson hinted at exactly this when he described the film as going into other realms and showing the fall of the angels alongside the resurrection story. He wasn't inventing science fiction, he was pulling directly from writings most people have never even heard of. And the deeper Isaiah travels, the stranger the vision becomes. The higher heavens are described as places where time no longer moves normally. Angels communicate without words. Light behaves like living intelligence. Entire realities exist beyond human comprehension. Then comes the final heaven, the dwelling place of God himself. A realm so overwhelming that Isaiah says no human language could fully explain what he saw there. But the most shocking part comes during Christ's descent back through the heavens toward earth. As he passes through each realm, the beings there fail to recognize who he truly is. The rulers of the lower heavens believe they are witnessing an ordinary figure moving through creation. They have no idea they are watching the force that will ultimately destroy death itself. And that's where the story connects directly to the resurrection. Because in these ancient texts, the resurrection was never just about one man returning from the dead. It was a cosmic event, a confrontation between divine light and every power ruling over fear, suffering, corruption, and death across all realms of existence. That's the version of Christ Mel Gibson appears to be bringing to the screen. Not just the suffering man on the cross, but the terrifying cosmic figure hidden behind the story the world thought it already knew. In the second heaven, Isaiah witnesses the movements of stars and celestial powers being guided across the universe. In the third, he enters paradise itself, seeing the tree of life surrounded by impossible beauty. He walks through gates made of living fire and across surfaces that shimmer like solidified starlight. Nothing resembles ordinary matter. The higher he ascends, the less human language seems capable of describing what he sees. By the sixth heaven, the experience becomes unbearable. The beings there radiate such overwhelming glory that Isaiah collapses under the weight of it. Yet even their brilliance, according to the text, is only a shadow of what exists above them. Then comes the seventh heaven, a realm beyond normal creation itself. There Isaiah encounters the Beloved One, a figure of unimaginable radiance, preparing to descend into the human world. And this is where the ancient text becomes truly shocking. Christ does not simply travel from heaven to earth. He hides himself. At every level of heaven, he deliberately veils his true nature so the beings there can even look at him. In the sixth heaven, he appears like one of the sixth order. In the fifth, he takes on the form of the fifth. Step by step, level by level, his glory is restrained, not because his power weakens, but because he chooses to contain it. The infinite compressing itself into the finite. This isn't described as a fall, it's described as a mission, a deliberate act of cosmic concealment carried out across multiple realms of existence. At every stage, Christ willingly becomes smaller, so creation itself won't fully recognize who is moving through it. By the time he is born in Bethlehem, even the angels of the lower heavens see only a human child. None of them realize the force sustaining reality itself is hidden inside that fragile body. Only the Father and the Spirit know the truth. And in this framework, the crucifixion becomes something far bigger than a human execution. It becomes a rupture in reality itself. The being holding creation together experiences death. Not symbolically, literally. The source behind existence goes silent for a moment in time, and according to these texts, the universe reacts instantly. The darkness covering the land wasn't weather. The earthquake wasn't natural disaster. Creation itself was responding to the death of the one sustaining it. Then comes the resurrection. Not simply a man returning to life, but limitless power breaking free from human limitation all at once. Every veil removed. Every layer of restraint shattered instantly. The guards at the tomb collapse in terror. The disciples are overwhelmed. And the stone isn't rolled away because someone pushed it aside. It moves because what's inside can no longer remain contained. And what makes this so unsettling is that Mel Gibson has hinted at almost this exact vision for his upcoming resurrection film. Not a simple retelling, a cosmic event. Because these Ethiopian writings portray Christ not just as a teacher or miracle worker, but as the living force behind reality itself. When he calms the storm, nature recognizes its creator. When he walks on water, the water obeys the voice that formed it. When he raises the dead, life itself responds to his command. Every miracle carries the same message. I made this, and it still knows my voice. The most astonishing part is how close these ancient texts came to disappearing forever. For generations, Western scholars dismissed Ethiopian manuscripts as isolated curiosities instead of foundational Christian history. But modern researchers studying the ancient Ge'ez texts are now realizing something extraordinary. Ethiopia preserved traditions and writings that much of the world lost centuries ago. Hidden inside remote mountain monasteries, copied by hand under candlelight for generations, were descriptions of Christ unlike anything most people had ever seen. Not softened, Not simplified, not reduced, but cosmic, overwhelming, and terrifying in scale. And this is where everything begins to converge. Mel Gibson has always insisted that Scripture is real history. He openly speaks about his Christian faith and says he trusts the Bible completely. But the version of Christ he keeps describing for the resurrection of the Christ, a being moving across multiple realms, confronting fallen angels, descending through heaven and hell itself, doesn't come from the traditional Western canon most people grew up with. It mirrors the Ethiopian tradition almost exactly. Whether Gibson intentionally studied those ancient texts or arrived at the same vision through years of scriptural research, the overlap is impossible to ignore. And suddenly, the familiar image of Jesus starts to feel very different. The calm figure painted during the Renaissance, the soft-spoken teacher shown in Western art for centuries, may never have been the full picture. Because the Christ described in Enoch and the ascension of Isaiah is something far more overwhelming, a cosmic force, a being of fire, light, judgment, and limitless authority. The living Word holding reality together, moment by moment, through his very existence. That was the older vision, the version preserved for centuries in Ethiopian monasteries while much of the world never even knew these texts existed. And if Gibson follows through on the imagery he's hinted at, audiences in 2027 may witness a portrayal of Christ unlike anything Hollywood has ever attempted before. Not just a resurrected man, but infinite divinity exploding back into full radiance after willingly confining itself inside human flesh. A being who experiences pain, betrayal, suffering, and death in real time, then tears through every layer of limitation at once. Not symbolic, not gentle, cosmic. And maybe the strangest part of all is realizing who protected these ideas for so long. Anonymous monks hidden in mountain monasteries, men copying manuscripts by hand beside oil lamps for generations, preserving texts they believed the world was never supposed to lose. They understood something history forgot, that powerful institutions often reshape spiritual ideas into forms easier to control, easier to manage, easier to contain. But those monks kept copying anyway, century after century, page after page, protecting writings most people would never read. And now, after 17 centuries, a filmmaker obsessed with the resurrection story may be about to bring pieces of that forgotten vision back into the mainstream. The monks who preserved those texts never knew Mel Gibson's name, but they may have preserved exactly what he was searching for. And if entire visions of Christ could disappear from public knowledge for centuries, what else is still hidden inside those ancient Ethiopian monasteries? Because according to researchers, there are still manuscripts the outside world barely understands. Texts about angels, about events before the flood, about prophecies tied to the end of days. And some scholars believe the Book of Enoch was only the beginning.